Hot seat, what are those people thinking? Nuclear hot seat, what have those boys been drinking? Nuclear hot seat, the corium is sinking. Our time to act is shrinking, but our activists are linking. Nuclear hot seat, it's the bomb.
Welcome to Nuclear Hot Seat, the weekly international news magazine keeping you up to date on all things nuclear from a different perspective. My name is Libbe HaLevy. I am the producer and host, as well as a survivor of the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island from just 1 mile away. So I know what can happen when those nuclear so-called experts get it wrong. What does it take to force corporate nuclear interests and the government to fulfill their obligations to local communities to clean up a radioactively contaminated site? That's what we look at this week with our guest, Patty Ameno, who talks about her more than 20-year battle regarding the Numnutz site in her hometown of Apollo, Pennsylvania, as well as the recent spectacular court decision regarding a $350 million foos wrap cleanup. Hear what a single individual, a woman of tenacity, courage, focus, and stamina can accomplish. You will be amazed and inspired. Plus, we will have our ever-popular Numnutz of the Week feature, the nuclear reactor duck and cover report, activist shout-out, and more nuclear information than Andrea Mitchell is interested in hearing from Bernie Sanders. All of this coming up in just a few moments. Today is Tuesday, January 19, 2016, and here is the week's nuclear news from our perspective. The U.S. Department of Energy's long-term plan for dealing with material contaminated with plutonium and other radioactive detritus from U.S. weapons program is to bury it underground at the currently inoperable waste isolation pilot plant in southern New Mexico. The WIPP site has been shut down since Valentine's Day of 2014, when a waste container exploded and radioactive materials leaked out into the environment. But now, 3 Stanford nuclear scientists have pointed out in a new commentary article in the journal Nature that WIPP was not designed to hold as much plutonium as is now being considered for disposal there, let alone to safeguard it for the next 10,000 years as planned. They point out that the current regulatory period of 10,000 years is short relative to the 24,100-year half-life of plutonium-239, let alone that of its decay product, uranium-235, which has a half-life of 700 million years. Recent research shows that California has a higher number of thyroid cancer cases than the national average. UCLA researcher Dr. Avital Harari said that the increase was statistically significant and not just a random difference. While radiation is a known thyroid risk factor, and the plume from Fukushima did hit the west coast of the United States, the study cites sun, diet, tobacco, and pesticides as the big environmental causes of cancer. La la la, I can't hear you! Radiation, Fukushima! Don't know what's causing this spike in the California cancer numbers. Right. On January 5th, the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, took Administrative Law Judge Melanie Darling off the ongoing hearings into how the decommissioning of the San Onofre nuclear plant should be handled. Throughout the lengthy hearings, Darling would not let San Diego attorney Mike Aguirre make his case that the passing of costs to ratepayers was the result of secret, illegal, unreported meetings between the CPUC commissioners and officials of Southern California Edison. Aguirre and his law partner, Maria Severson, has turned out to be correct, and the Attorney General has a criminal investigation well underway. And now for the duck and cover report. In Columbia, South Carolina, on January 17, the Westinghouse Electric Corporation uranium fuel fabrication plant had an alert declared. That's 2 of 4 steps towards kiss your ass goodbye, when a fire was not extinguished within 15 minutes. At Quad Cities in Illinois, on the banks of the Mississippi River, on the 15th of January, there was a loss of secondary containment in one of the nuclear reactors. At the Diablo Canyon facility in California, on January 14, there was notification of an unusual event when an unauthorized person just happened to show up in the owner-controlled area. No further word on who, what, or why. On October 4th, a valve was stuck in the open position at the Millstone Nuclear Power Station in Connecticut, a situation made worse because it was not properly diagnosed or closed by the 4-person crew manning the system for more than 3 hours, resulting in a leak of 16,570 gallons of reactor cooling water. Once they realized the valve was stuck, it was shut in about 10 minutes, stopping the coolant loss. An independent nuclear power safety expert has reviewed the situation and determined that better training is needed for Millstone workers. Ya think? And Mining Awareness Plus warns us that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is asking for comments to define what structures, systems, and components are safety-related and non-safety-related. However, considering that the repercussions of a nuclear accident are so serious, deadly, and long-lasting, some radionuclides will remain lethal for longer than humans have been on the face of the Earth, which means that all structures, systems, and components of nuclear reactors and other nuclear facilities are all safety-related. And that's this week's Duck and Cover Report. Over to Japan, where in a follow-up to a story on nuclear hot seat number 234, it has now been proven that radioactive substances that contaminated rice paddies in Minamisoma of Fukushima Prefecture in 2013 did come from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant. This according to an international group of researchers who reject a denial issued by Japan's Nuclear Safety Authority. Power companies in Japan have abandoned or reconsidered their original plans to equip emergency response facilities for 15 reactors at 7 nuclear plants with quake-absorbing devices, and instead simply make them quake-resistant. What's the difference? While the quake-resistant structure is designed to enhance the strength of a building, the quake-absorbing structure is equipped with a buffer placed between the ground and the building to absorb tremors. It's like the difference between water-resistant and waterproof. With one you get radioactive, with the other you have a chance of remaining dry. This is Numnutz Adjacent. As work continues to decommission the remains of the reactors at Fukushima Daiichi, a project that involves 7,000 or so workers, tours of the complex by outsiders are becoming increasingly popular. By the end of last September, some 16,000 people had visited, protected only by cotton gloves, flimsy disposable face masks, and special footwear. Oh, and they carry dosimeters. But here's the real one.
Nuclear hot seat, nuclear hot seat, nuclear hot seat, Numnutz of the week.
Kengo Kuma is the designer of Japan's new national stadium that is intended to serve as the main venue for the tattered, boycotted remains of the 2020 Tokyo Summer NOlympics and Para-NOlympics. Architect Kuma says he wants to build it with timber from areas hit by the March 2011 East Japan earthquake and tsunami in construction of the venue. Missing from his description was any mention of the area's ongoing bombardment of radiation from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactors with their triple meltdown and missing corium. In an interview with the Mainichi Shimbun, Kuma indicated that he would stand by the idea of having the Olympics aid restoration of areas hit by disasters. He says that the Miyagi Prefecture town of Minami-san-riku is a producer of quality cedar. Well, maybe it was before the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster began, but as early as 2011, extremely high radiation was found in cedar flowers and pollen. In 2012, deformities were found in the cedar trees. And then in 2013, the radiation level of the Japanese cedar leaves were tested and found to be more than 20 times background radiation. Not exactly a great recommendation for using that cedar in any kind of construction, let alone something that's going to be in proximity to the world's premier athletes. Japan's former ambassador to Switzerland, Mitsuhei Murata, was a guest on Nuclear Hot Seat number 234 on December 15 of last year, and he has called for Japan to stage an honorable retreat from hosting the Olympics because of the dangers of Fukushima. Japan's not exactly listening to former Ambassador Murata, so it looks like this venue will be built with radioactive cedar as a staging area for the world's greatest athletes who don't mind risking early cancers and the inability to genetically parent healthy, long-lived children. And that's why you, Kengo Kuma, are this week's
Nuclear Hot Seat Numnutz of the Week.
And in Taiwan, Ing-wen Tsai of the Democratic Progressive Party won the presidency in a landslide with 56.1% of the vote. Her success was credited in large part with the role of her anti-nuclear stance during the election. She has said that she envisions a nuclear-free homeland with a bigger role for energy efficiency and renewables. We'll have our featured interview in just a moment, but first, Nuclear Hot Seat meets its monthly financial obligations through the support of listeners like you, which is why I ask for your help on every program. Right now, an opportunity has opened up for me to attend the February 20th summit in St. Louis on the Westlake Landfill, Bridgeton Fire, Coldwater Creek Cancer Clusters, and more. I want to be there to bring you all the information firsthand from powerful leaders such as Dr. Helen Caldicott, Love Canal's Lois Gibbs, and a not yet confirmed but very possible Bob Alvarez, as well as many others. This is an ongoing nuclear disaster in the middle of our heartland, and Nuclear Hot Seat wants to give you the front row seat you deserve on all the breaking news. So help me cover the expenses. You can donate to Nuclear Hot Seat by going to nuclearhotseat.com and clicking on the big red donate button. Use PayPal, your credit or debit card, or for the less technologically trusting among us, email info@nuclearhotseat.com for a snail mail address where you can send your donation the old-fashioned way. Whatever you can do to help me get there, you've got my gratitude. Never doubt that a single motivated individual can have an enormous impact against the numbnuts of the nuclear industry. And that's what this week's guest is all about. Patricia Ameno, and that's the last time we'll use her formal first name, grew up in Apollo, Pennsylvania, 35 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, not realizing that her childhood home was directly across the street from the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, or NUMEC, in Parks Township. NUMEC manufactured fuel for commercial nuclear power plants and the Navy's nuclear submarines, leaving behind a legacy of uranium and plutonium waste that has impacted the health of everyone in that area, not the least of whom was Patty. She is also a U.S. Navy veteran with over 10 years of experience, including Naval Investigation Service. She's a former U.S. federal criminal investigator with the Department of Defense and other federal investigative agencies. And she's done postgraduate studies at Chapman Institute and UCLA in criminal justice. The nuclear industry messed with the wrong woman. Listen to this amazing story of what one individual's tenacity, courage, focus, and stamina has been able to accomplish against the hydra-headed monster that is the nuclear industry. Patty Ameno, welcome to Nuclear Hot Seat.
Glad to be here, Libbe.
Where did you grow up and what was the area like?
Apollo, Pennsylvania. was basically a really small town of about a little over 1,800 people, maybe 2,000 back then. And it was made up of blue-collar families that either worked in steel mills or in the mines or in the foundries. It was just the 50s and the 60s. Those were really big days of innocence. And Apollo abuts other towns and across the river from other towns in very close proximity. And so they're one of the hubs within the Kiski Valley. And the Kiski Valley is comprised of 13 communities. And you grew up here, you knew everybody in those 13 towns around.
When did you become aware of NUMEC, which stands for Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, and how close to their facility did you live?
I grew up directly across the street from the plant, unknowingly across the street from a nuclear plant. And because it was an abandoned steel mill. And back in the day when I was, coming up as a child, NUMEC got in there in 1957. And all we heard that it was an industry that was making fuel for Navy ships. The word nuclear, radiation, or atomic never came into, the purview. But when I really first became aware of it was in December of 1988 when I came back home after retiring out from the United States government.
So the entire time you were growing up, you had no awareness that you had a nuclear facility next door. Did you have any sense of what they were doing with their waste material, or you just kind of played innocently throughout the area?
The kids would do what kids would do. I left the area at the age of 17, and I came back after I graduated from high school, and I came back intermittently. I went into the Navy, and I served for over 10 years, got out on a disability. And when I was in the Navy, I worked with Naval Investigative Service, which used to be called NIS. It's now fondly referred to as NCIS. And I got out, and I came back to the area, but I wasn't in the valley. I went up to Indiana, Pennsylvania, and I used my GI Bill, and I furthered my education. And then I got picked up by the Defense Department as a federal criminal investigator. And so I was assigned in different parts of the United States, the last place being Southern California.
What brought you back to that area, you said in 1988, and when did you start becoming aware that there was a problem with the NUMEC facility or what was left of it?
It was kind of twofold. My dad started getting ill, and then I wasn't feeling all that great, so I wanted to get closer to home. I had the time in service. I just retired out and came back home in December of 88.
What gave you the first awareness that there was a problem with NUMEC?
My dad. It was maybe just a couple days after I got home in December of 88. And he said, Patty, he said, look, you retired out from the government. He says, you do investigations. Could you find out for me and for some of the other people in the town what's going on over at the plant? I said, what do you mean what's going on over at the plant? And he said, well, that's a nuclear plant. And that was the first time I ever heard the word nuclear referred to that site. I said, really? And he said, yes. He said, and the company isn't telling us anything. And I says, well, Dad, a company's not going to tell you anything. They're going to protect their own liability. And he said, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission isn't telling us anything either. And again, I was so naive coming out of the government, thinking that that was just a communication breakdown. He said that place had a lot of stacks, and some people were saying that maybe it came one off site. My dad retired out from the steel mill directly across the street, less than 100 feet is where I grew up and where the deli that was attached to the house was located. And so a lot of those workers would go into the deli with their work clothes on. And my dad wanted to know, and he had every right to know, and so did everybody else in the town.
In other words, if there was any residue perhaps on their clothing that they may have been depositing in the store or in your local area?
No, because of the stacks. 124 stacks. When I started getting the documents, I was jaw-dropped at the amount of stacks that plant had.
Let's roll this back to how you began your investigation of the site now that it's 1988 and your dad has made you aware that there may be some problems there.
After my dad made me promise to look into this, I found out that the plant was undergoing a decommissioning and that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had put documents, considered it a public document room, in the town library. So I would go up there, and these documents were on microfiche, and they had one of these old dinosaur viewers that you would just have to sit there hours on end to look over them. Fortunately, this viewer had a printer on it as well. And so I was able to acquire some documents, and those documents really tweaked my interest because there was one, the very first document I ever read was a 1957 document, and it was pre-startup report that the company had an outside contractor to do. And this contractor went out and around the town and took sampling so that they would have a baseline of what the radiation levels were prior to this plant starting up. And on page 4, there was just a 2-sentence paragraph. And the contractors were telling the company and highly recommended that the plant carry on with regular testing in the unrestricted areas for the future potential of any changes in state and federal laws and regulations, and for the potential of litigation. That was a very big flag to me.
It sounds like they were anticipating that there would be radiation or other forms of toxicity released and that there would be lawsuits down the road. Is that what you got from this 2-sentence paragraph?
Absolutely, that they were dealing with something that would cause them a problem, and more than that, that would cause a problem for the people in the community.
Having gained this information, how did you proceed? What actions did you take, and how did you begin to build this case?
Well, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was having in Apollo what they called exit meetings, and the company would be there. A couple times I wanted to ask the company managers some questions, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would not allow the company to answer questions, and I thought this very odd. It really appeared that they were shielding. They were the buffer. It didn't sit well. And then I noticed that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, when anybody in the community would ask about different levels of radiation that they would find or what type of testing they were doing inside of the plant, they would come back and they would mix their formulas. They would mix rotogens with evacuees, with picocuries per gram. They would mix this all up. And the people of this area are working class. And so the level of communication that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was bringing forth to the general public was intimidating them. They didn't know what they were speaking about. And the NRC did that on purpose.
Yes, they do. The entire industry does, because if we can't understand the quantities they are talking about and how they are measuring them, it makes us feel inadequate to the task, and we tend to back off, and they've achieved what they want to achieve, which is totally obfuscating the information that we so dearly need to know. When you saw that there was this kind of a blockade to the information, with you being a trained researcher, investigator, what did you do to start tracking down the truth?
Well, I started getting more documents. My brother-in-law worked at that plant, and those guys were threatened with prison if they would have said anything about anything regarding what they did at that facility. And so he wouldn't talk to me. The mindset that the company was putting out to their workers was that any questions the public could jeopardize their jobs. The workers had no idea that they were going to be without jobs. The company blew smoke up their backside saying that they were just doing a cleanup. They were decommissioning and stopping one operation, going to do another operation, to come in. They were totally blind with this. part of the decommissioning. There was a contractor that was located in town, and Pauline was a whistleblower. She had her own company called ECO, the Environmental Compliance Organization. And I used to pick Pauline's brain, but she wasn't the only one. Over the course of years, I have had the benefit of fantastic people like the late Dr. Alice Stewart, the late Dr. John Goffman, the late Dr. Mancuso, who lived right up in Pittsburgh, Dr. Arjun Makayajani, who was one of our experts in the first federal civil action that I spearheaded.
You're gathering this information together. Once you got the documents and you started being aware that there was a problem here, what were some of the early actions that you took to start building a case, or at least investigating further?
Some of the people were coming to me because they knew I was retired out from the government, and I would go to these meetings. But then I had some people coming to me and telling me that their dog, 5 years old, dying of cancer. And I noticed one day just driving around, there were two, in a small town, there were two people walking their dogs at different locations in the town, and they both had visible tumors all over these dogs. And so I went around to some of the vets and just asked them if they had noticed any incidents or increases in cancers in the dogs and the cats and any other animals. And they said it was a very striking increase in cancers in these animals. From there, I went to the funeral homes, and I asked the funeral home directors about how many cancers they were seeing. Was there a significant amount of cancers? And they concurred. There was a significant amount of cancers, and cancers in children. And that made me take a foot. I went around door to door. And in one community, Oklahoma, there was a street, and that's up over the hill. Across the river is 200 feet from Apollo, and that's up on the hill. There was a street that had 16 homes. There were 8 homes in a row that all the women had breast cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, that was very striking to me. It was worse. And that was just the Apollo area. I went down to the Parks Township area where we had the plutonium facility. Here's this plutonium facility, and it abutted a dairy farm. I constantly was thinking, does this milk do a body good? I remember being able to see, years ago, the dairy cattle sitting out there, because I would ride with my dad out of Apollo into Leechburg, where he worked at, and I just remember those dairy cattle and not paying attention to what the other buildings were there. You just didn't know. And nobody suspected, because there wasn't a fence around that facility. There weren't placards. There were no cautionary signs, nothing that nobody would ever talk about, any warning.
Once you were collecting this information, what actions did you start taking on it?
I kept asking to have some off-site testing.
Who were you asking?
I asked the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at some of the exit meetings if they could please do some off-site testing to allay any fears, concerns, or questions that the general public would have concerning any possible emissions from that plant that may have escaped that plant. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, joined with the manager of the company, continuously stated that everything was perfectly safe and nothing went over the fence.
Right.
And it was at that meeting that a woman by the name of Fran Munko stood up, just a housewife, Fran, stood up and asked the NRC manager at the time, it was a gentleman by the name of Jerome Roth, didn't you do some testing off-site? We saw you down at the riverbank. Could you tell us, did you find any contamination? And he is doing the NRC dance move of mixing all the different formulas together and just giving her a bunch of over highly technical gobbledygook. Mm-hmm. And so I saw Fran just kind of wilt down in her seat. But then she got back up again and she said, "Excuse me, I didn't understand what you said. could you just answer the question, yes or no? Did you find any contamination off-site? And then my trigger got pulled because that NRC official told her to sit down and shut up, that she had already had her question. That was all she wrote for me.
What did you do at that point?
Any civil decorum that I had, it left the door. It exited. And my voice can bellow quite a bit.
I have no doubt.
And from the back of the hall, I said, you cannot talk to these people this way. You're a public servant. These people have questions, and you're required to give them the answers. And, you know, they basically closed a meeting up at that particular point, and I left out of there. I was good and pissed.
What did you do with that energy?
What I started doing after that was to raise the public awareness. I knew that the company had the workers hogtied and scared about ever talking, and that the public was so trusting of our government. And so I was going out, was wearing sandwich board signs on my torso and carrying one in each hand, saying, honk if you want to be safe. And DEP, protect the people, not the industry. And I was asking for an investigation. It meant raising awareness, and it meant asking, as an investigator, what we know of is called the peak attention questions. Asking the questions. And for the most part, with the documents that I would have, I already had the answers. I wanted to hear what they said in public.
And what were they saying in public?
They were evasive. They wouldn't answer. They would continue on with the spiel that everything is perfectly safe, everything is perfectly safe. Then I went to a council meeting in Apollo and tried to get the fathers of the town to try to mandate or request the state to do off-site testing. Now, at this time, I was already diagnosed with one of my brain tumors. And there were a lot of incidents of brain tumors in that small town. And so I asked them, I said, look, we are a government that is based on a check and balance system. I understand and sympathize with the company's right to withhold any information. However, a lot of people in this town, including myself, is somewhat skeptical of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So could we then ask, as a body, a governing body, for the EPA to come in and do some tests as a check and balance system? The manager of that plant was there. His name was Joe Sapika. He came to me and he said, Miss Ameno, if you would like to pay for all the cleanup costs and the delays that would occur therefrom, then go ahead. He attempted to intimidate me. Well, the council took a break for an executive session on this issue. And Joe Sapika called me out into the hallway. And he said, look, we haven't been formally introduced. I think I came off on some bad footing. My name is Joe Sapika, and I'm the manager of the plant. And I said, yes, I know. He said, we did a lot of business at your mom and dad's deli over there. I said, well, they appreciate it, and you got your money's worth. You didn't bring me out here to talk about my mom and dad's deli. What is it that you wish to speak about? And then he went on to tell me that what I was doing was not healthy for me. And I looked at him. I said, what the hell did you just tell me? He said, what you're doing is not healthy for you. And then the council came out of the office, and then Mr. Sapika turned and said, well, the document you want, it should be up in the public document room. And that was more fuel on my fire. I don't get intimidated. It just makes me angry.
And we're up to what year here?
1992.
So we're in 1992, and you've come as far as, it sounds like, being threatened by the manager of NUMEC.
I don't take kind to threats. And so I started looking into Mr. Joe Sapika. And then under Title 10 of the Code of Federal Regulations, it's quite distinct of what the minimum requirements are in order to be a nuclear plant manager, i.e., for the Apollo plant, which was a uranium hexafluoride facility, there was a minimum requirement of a Bachelor of Science degree in the nuclear or technical field and 10 years minimum of experience in the same. For the plutonium facility, it was the same in education, but 15 years experience in the nuclear or technical field. Now understand, they only had one manager for both facilities. When I looked him up, he only had a Bachelor of Arts degree, and his only prior experience was that of being co-owner with his brother in a hardware store that went belly up in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. That was all she wrote. Then I started really firing up the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at that point. He didn't get fired. Here's what the NRC did. I had to embarrass the NRC in front of television cameras to do something. And what they did, they issued a notice of violation, but then they changed his title and still kept him there and credited him with 7 years experience.
Not surprising. So you've got an area where there is a peak of cancers showing up in children, breast cancer in women, tumors in dogs, additional cancers showing up through the mortuaries and the people who have died. You've got all of this evidence that you are accumulating. Give us a sense of how the years went by while you were working at it, because we're only up to 1992 at this point.
Well, let me take you then to 1993. I had been working with Congressman John P. Murtha, and I got tired, and I asked him, because when you go to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and ask a question, they would pawn it off and say, that's not our jurisdiction, that's the State Department of Environmental Protection's jurisdiction. Go to the state, they would come back with us, that's not our jurisdiction, that's the EPA's. I'm not going to chase my tail. So I went to Congressman Murtha and I said, we need a meeting to have a representative from all these agencies here so they can't continuously pass the buck. And that's exactly what happened. 6 months down the road, Congressman Murtha got us that meeting. And that meeting was advertised in the paper for 3 days to have time limitations. Now, under Robert's Rules of Order, that's about 3 to 5 minutes. You give me 3 to 5 minutes, I'm going to do some damage. But when we got into the meeting, you signed, as always, signed in. Then they asked us to take a number. And I said, what are you doing here? You give a raffle away at an environmental meeting? And they said, no. When your number's called, you get one question and one question only. I was off the hook. That was it. They did an unannounced, unadvertised change-up that was completely out of line. And then I noticed that there was police in the meeting. Never before had they had police at the meeting. An hour and a half before that meeting, I had a phone call from the company's, Babcock and Wilcox's attorney. He said, I understand you have some documents. And I said, I do. He said, would you be interested in meeting with me so we can go over those documents and so we can negotiate through them? He said the key word, negotiate. And so I told him, I said, I'd love to meet with you and discuss documents. However, I have a meeting I have to go to. He said, yes, I know. I said, but if you really want to know about these documents. He says, yes, I do. I said, I suggest you pick the paper up tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. Click. An hour and a half later, I get to the meeting. The police is there. They changed it up. I ended up getting arrested for asking too many questions at a public meeting. 9 months later, I was acquitted, and then I turned around and sued the town because they ended up getting the town to facilitate it. The company did, and so did the NRC. And so I knew that it was just a matter of time because a couple months before that, my brake lines had been cut, all 4 of them.
On your car?
On my car. I could never say with definite who did it, but I had never had any problems before. In November of 1993, I spoke to Bill Silkwood, as in Karen Silkwood's father, because I knew at that particular point, after that arrest, they were going to keep coming after me. They had the police following me and stopping me, checking my registration, checking my insurance and everything. You know, I had a hard way to go because the community was behind the government at the time. So I called Bill Silkwood. I told him what my plight was. He said, you need to talk to an attorney. I says, well, could you tell me who it was that was representing Karen that she was due to meet? And he said, that's Steve Walker. He had changed his name because he didn't want the notoriety in the movie. He gave me Steve's number. I called Steve up. He was familiar with NUMEC. He said, "Do you have any documents?" I said, "Yeah." "How many do you want?" He said, "How many do you have?" I said, "Thousands at this point." And he says, "Well, just give me some of the most demonstrative evidence." I said, "Okay." I said, "Do you want any videotape?" He started laughing. He said, you got videotape too?" I said, "Yeah, I videotaped." He said, "Send it on." I sent it overnight express. He was in my living room 3 days later. On June the 6th, 1994, that first federal civil action was filed.
So you filed your first federal action against Babcock & Wilcox and Atlantic Richfield Corporation in 1994. How far did that get, and what did you have to do to follow up on it?
Well, that case took 14 years. However, Fred Barron, who was the lead attorney, when it came to trial in 1998, of 200 people who were on, there was 8 people who were the first test plaintiffs. That the case, when it went to trial, of the first 8 test plaintiffs, the jury awarded those people $37.6 million. And the most important thing out of a federal civil action is discovery, because there came the mother lode of documents right there that had never seen the light of day before. They were released to my attorney, and my attorney gave them all to me as well.
And this is the same attorney as was Karen Silkwood's attorney.
He was one of Karen Silkwood's attorneys, yes.
Incredible. So with this first finding, was there any kind of resolution for the case, or did this just open up additional channels?
That case was finally settled in 2 parts. 2007, Atlantic Richfield bailed on Babcock & Wilcox, and they settled. And Babcock & Wilcox finally settled in 2009. The overall settlements were approximately $92 million.
Who was it who received that $92 million?
People in the community who had either buried their children, buried their husbands or wives, or who had cancers that were survivors. These were not workers.
What has since happened to take care of the workers?
All the documents that I was finding regarding the workers at the document room that the NRC had set up, I was completely shocked with how they just openly, they didn't redact any of the information on the workers. I mean, their dates of birth, their social security numbers, everything was just out there. I was getting these documents and putting them aside because I knew the suffering. I had actually seen and knew of several cases where the company had let some of the workers go that were getting sick, and they didn't have any insurance, nothing. They ended up losing their homes. It was just a damn shame what was happening here.
What are the various settlements that have taken place? Because I know that as of a few weeks ago, there was an ultimate finding about the cleanup taking place. Talk us through where the different cases were and what was achieved by each one of them.
On the civil land, of course, there was the first federal civil action that I spearheaded, 14 years, $92 million to 200 plaintiffs. In 2010, I spearheaded a second federal civil action suit. That's in appeal right now, so that's still not settled. On the regulatory end, I had a hearing with the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board panel. It was a paper hearing on the Parks Township nuclear site because the waste dump came under their operations license at that time, and they were planning on splitting the license. And I knew if they split the license, they were going to leave us in perpetuity with the waste. And that's exactly what they had tried to do. That I didn't win, but I still was able to get some of the NRC and the officials at B&W and ARCO on the record with affidavits that later came back in federal civil actions to bite them. At the same time, our sewage authority was contaminated. They had a lagoon over there, and it was contaminated with plutonium, daughter product americium-241. But the NRC kept saying that it was just minute amounts, and I kept telling them to go deeper. They didn't want to go deeper. I would just push it. And so the NRC's resolve for this, they had an unannounced meeting at an archery place outside of the area, and I found out about it. They were actually going to give the sewage authority a nuclear license to just leave it there.
In other words, name it a nuclear waste site, and that would give it permission, and it wouldn't have to be cleaned up?
No, they would just give a nuclear license for it to be there, period. So when I found out about this meeting, I got there and they had called it a meeting, but then at the meeting, they tried to do a disco move of going straight into a hearing. That would have been unannounced. And I shut it down. I came close to kicking tables over that night. And then they stopped. And then I went to the DEP secretary, who was Katie McGinty. She was in Clinton's White House. She headed up CEQ one time. The Council on Environmental Quality, that office is in the White House. I met with Secretary McGinty in 2007. Pennsylvania had a specific law. It was Act 107 and specifically Section 104 that stated any special nuclear material in any amounts, any quantities must go to a licensed facility. So Secretary McGinty reversed the decision that DEP had been taking, which was a wrong-headed decision for years. The wrong-headed decision was to be in compliance with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, either giving them a nuclear license or having it merely sent to municipal landfills where we take our household trash to, so somebody else could get it. Kicking it down the road, anything for the company not to have to pay what they should be paying for.
Okay, so you had the meeting with her, and she reversed the decision. What was the ruling or what was the decision that came out?
That it had to be cleaned up. And it got cleaned up. That was actually a really good success.
Let's get clear on something. How many settlements have there been in this case? How many major rulings have there had to be to get to the point where now the Army Corps of Engineers is going to do the cleanup in Park Township?
Okay, well, the Army Corps of Engineers in Parks Township is one thing. One has to understand that NUMEC was a multi-headed, multifaceted beast here. NUMEC, Atlantic Richfield Corporation, Babcock and Wilcox. You had the Apollo site. That was a separate thing. But from the Apollo site, then you had the contamination of the river and whatever went into the sewage authority. And, of course, the sewage authority was another thing because that was accumulation of both the Apollo and the Park site. Now, the Apollo decommissioning, that got done. Then you had the plutonium facility. Okay, and the operations was one thing, and then you had the burials, to what I've been dealing with the Corps of Engineers. And then you had the federal civil actions and the workers. So I was juggling and doing all these things at one time.
And who did you have as support on this? Were you part of an organization? Was this a crew of people, a committee of people?
No, I did this myself. And thank God I was able to get probably the best environmental attorney in the country, the attorneys, Steve Waka, the late Fred Barron, and his team. Oh, my goodness. Kay Reeves, Alicia Butler, Michael Kasky, who's down in Texas.
So with all of these settlements, as of a few weeks ago, the ruling came out that the cleanup is going to take place through the Army Corps of Engineers. Is that the FUSRAP program?
It is.
So FUSRAP is going to be doing the cleanup of Parks Township.
That's correct.
What is still on the horizon for this site? Or is it finally the opportunity for you to lay the cudgel down?
No, I wish I could lay it down. But you see, the SLDA, the waste dump, was separated from the original license of the operations site. And the waste dump area that is fenced in now is about 44.5 acres. However, the original deeded licensed property at the time the operations were intact and the burials took place was 193 acres. And I can tell you they buried on just about every inch of that property. I think it's going to come in two parts. The Corps of Engineers will work on the SLDA. And I am looking to get the EPA with the areas outside of the SLDA. I do not want to muddy the waters with what I had to fight for and what's been fought for with respect to the SLDA.
Just clarify for me, SLDA?
The shallow land disposal area, and that's the $350 million plus cleanup of the 44.5 acres.
That's what's going to be cleaned up under FUSRAP.
That's correct.
Where are you now in terms of your health?
Well, every day above ground's a good day. I'm still vertical sucking air on my end, so I guess I'm okay. I still have another brain tumor. I'm to the point now, because I've been through so much. I mean, I've had my head opened up twice for one brain tumor. I still have another brain tumor. I've had uterine cancer. Those are the things I attribute to being exposed by the industry. That's a side of physical problems I've dealt with when I was in the Navy. I'm basically with the mindset now that I don't even want to go to a doctor. I'm just ready to take whatever comes. But I don't want to hear any bad news because I have enough to fight right now. Here's the one thing I've always believed. The truth may sometimes stand alone, but it always stands, and people will get behind it when they know it.
I understand that you have been in contact through the years with the moms from the Westlake area in North St. Louis and been certainly a source of information and advice to them.
They are wonderful down there. And, I think it's our duty as activists for whatever knowledge we have, because knowledge is power. I haven't been able to go down there, and I really hope in the spring to get down to Bridgeton or Westlake area to meet some of these fantastic people. And meeting over Facebook and just feeling, I can feel their their craving for some justice, for somebody to do something down there. They know they're in a cesspool.
I know that in the interviews and the other talking that I've done with Karen Nickel and with Dawn Chapman from the Westlake Moms, that you have been a resource to them and someone who has been able to support them not only with information, but with the kind of emotional support that one needs in dealing with nuclear.
It's a lot that they're taking on. There's a lot of people that are out, and that's fantastic. Everybody should be out. I'm appalled at the local governments right on up to the governor's office. I'm appalled at the way that the people have just been dismissed with their concerns. Whatever I can do, whatever resources I have, whether it's support, whether it's documents, whatever it is, I'm going to try to help them, because those are my brothers and sisters, not only there, but Irwin, Tennessee, out in California, up in Canada, all over the place. We have a lot of bridge making that we've done as activists across this country.
Patty, we wish you every health, every blessing, every support possible. And truly, you are an example of what a single, motivated, focused individual can do in battling nuclear. When we can come together with you and with people like you all over, we can succeed. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes focus, it takes stamina, but we can do this. And you are a living example of that.
Thank you, Libbe. And I'll tell you what you do is an enormous resource for people and getting that information disseminated. And I thank you very, very much.
That was and is the ever-amazing Patty Ameno. You can connect with her on Facebook. Activist shout-out. As I mentioned before, on February 20th, the Westlake landfill, Bridgeton fire, and North St. Louis nuclear contamination will be the focus of a sterling lineup of not just speakers, but active strategizers at a conference that is open to the public. Featured will be Dr. Helen Caldecott, Lois Gibbs of Love Canal, and on the verge of being confirmed, Bob Alvarez, and a number of other speakers as the lineup firms up. These are all major activist players and strategizers who will be discussing how to deal with the ongoing contamination in terms of health, safety, and political strategy. As I mentioned, I'm working to get there to cover it. For now, this shout-out goes to everyone in North St. Louis who is not only fighting the good fight, but is working to pull this event together and get it into the public consciousness. Now, if you want some help in getting it out to the media ASAP so that they can schedule advance stories, assign reporters, and reserve column inches and or airtime, let me know. I'm happy to help. Here's today's final thought. Going naked is a term the insurance industry uses to describe not having insurance. And when it comes to the worst hazards of nuclear power, America is going naked. The U.S. nuclear power industry is underinsured by hundreds of billions of dollars. The Price-Anderson limit on nuclear liability to the industry, set at $12.6 billion, is a joke. It wouldn't begin to cover the cleanup costs that already exist. Homeowners have no options because they're forced to go without coverage, as nuclear accidents and situations are automatically exempt from your homeowner's policy. Check it out under exemptions just to see it in black and white. Insurance companies know how to crunch numbers, and they're not dumb, so it must mean something that they don't want to be on the hook in case there is an accident. A lot of people think that they are immune to the impact of nuclear on their lives. I've often thought that a useful tool would be to create a map of the U.S. in layers, something that would present all of the areas of nuclear contamination that present risks to those living near them. The reactors, weapons manufacturing plants, uranium mining, waste burial sites, both legal and not, downwinders from the Nevada test site. It would be great to have each of these areas as the digital equivalent of transparencies, separate maps, and then you could layer them one on top of the other, showing progressively how much of our country is contaminated. I personally doubt that there will be any place, anywhere in this country, that is left untouched by all of the radiation. So it would be great to have a visual of that to show people exactly how at risk we are, and remind them that they can't get any kind of insurance coverage in case something goes wrong. And then hopefully this will light an old-fashioned bonfire under their posteriors to get them moving into a movement to shut down all nukes and make the nuclear polluters take responsibility for the cleanup. Anyone up for this? Going once? Going twice? This has been Nuclear Hot Seat for Tuesday, January 19, 2016. Material for this week's program has been researched and compiled from enenews.com, news.stanford.edu, sandigoreader.com, starherald.com, inagragazette.com, theday.com, Mining Awareness Plus, Beyond Nuclear, activistpost.com, NBC Los Angeles, asahi.com, mainichi.com, rawstory.com, nuclear-news.net, swbooster.com, antinuke.net, newyorktimes.com, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Nuclear Hot Seat Facebook community, which you are all invited to visit and like. Theme music written by me, sung by Marilee Weber, accompaniment by John Barnard, and recorded at Winslow Court Studio in Hollywood. Nuclear Hot Seat is syndicated by UCY.TV on the StuWebRadioNetwork.com, which is formerly Veterans Truth Network, in New Zealand by NewZSentinel.com, and here in the States out of Boston by ActivateMedia.org. We are always looking for other networks and news aggregators to connect with. So if you know of a website, a community radio station, or what the heck, Jon Stewart, he's going to be doing HBO now, let them know about Nuclear Hot Seat, and let me know so I can be in touch. Our archive is jam-packed with 238 shows worth of interviews, news, numbnuts, and lots of factoids of interest. You can check it out on our website, nuclearhotseat.com. We're available on YouTube under Nuclear Hot Seat Videos, that's our channel, and on iTunes. Nuclear Hot Seat is the activist voice on nuclear issues. So if you have a story lead, a hot tip, or a suggestion of someone to interview, send an email to info@nuclearhotseat.com. We are copyright 2016, Libbe HaLevy and Hardestry Communications. All rights reserved, but fair use allowed as long as proper attribution is provided. This is Libbe HaLevy of Hardestry Communications, the heart of the art of communicating, reminding you that we have all had our nuclear wake-up call. So don't go back to sleep, because we are all in the nuclear hot seat.
Nuclear hot seat. What are those people thinking? Nuclear hot seat. What have those boys been drinking? Nuclear hot seat. The corium is sinking. Our time to act is shrinking, but our activists are linking.